Okay, so here is the Mabie Todd Blackbird that I got from Colin, and Colin wrote, I've folded this in half because his address is on the other side. He says, please find and close the pen that blots after writing a few words. I hope you'll be able to improve its performance. Well, so do I. So a few words, let us have a look there. I'm just going to write a bit, and then we'll see what happens. An absolutely fantastic, timeless and wonderful sonnet by William Shakespeare, which I really love. Alright, now the problem is, that's a lot of words, and it's more than a few, and I didn't see any blotting. I'm sure I can make the thing blot, there we go, but that's just by flinging ink. And even after doing that, the pen just writes. I'm just going to use a low-tech blotter there. Okay, so the ink is Caran d'Ache, Blue Sky, which is a good ink, not too wet, not too dry. The paper is Rhodia, can't be that. I hope this noise isn't driving you absolutely nuts, by the way. My microphone is probably going to amplify it a bit. Okay. Now, this is not the only testing I've been doing. I've done this, and this. This is a blot, but that is because I flung ink at the page, not because it just dropped from the pen. I've done that, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've done that, and there was no blotting. So what could be causing the blotting then? Well, there's a couple of issues, I suppose. First is that it's possible that the pen happens to have a misaligned nib and feed, which is possible. It's an option, but especially with vintage pens. However, I'm going to take my loupe close to my camera here and try and show you that nib and feed, if possible. Is better? No. This was easier on my older camera. Doesn't really matter. Oh, I have to take it really close. Oh, there we go. But then you can't really see it, can you? Well, anyway, I mean, there is no gap there, which is good. A simple test is to take a sheet of paper and try and jam it between the nib and feed, and it's not possible. So that means the setting of the nib and feed is good. So that's not it. You can imagine that if there is a gap between the nib and the feed like this, then usually you have very poor flow, but I can see how a drop of ink would just fall out then. But that's not the case here. Even when you flex it to the max, you see that? I mean, there's just no blotting. And then the tines are really spread open widely. So that's not the option. I mean, that's not the case. Another option would be that there's a leak somewhere in the system. I have to open up the pen for that. Now what I notice is this railroading. Now granted, I mean, when you do this at a very high speed, and you can usually expect some railroading. Interesting enough, you don't get it right now, but there we go. Railroading. At a very high speed, it's very hard for the feed to keep up with the ink flow. But when you go slow, I mean, when you go too slow, you can also break the ink that is suspended between the tines. But when you go at a medium pace, something like this, then a pen should be able to keep up, I think. Especially a vintage pen, because they had very good feeds. You see quite a bit of skipping there, which makes me wonder whether the feed may just be dirty. So that's one thing we have to check. The second thing, and for that I'm first going to empty out the pen here. The second option, which is always the... I'm not going to put that in there, it's a very shaky thing, okay. Doesn't have to be completely void of ink, but I want it to be as empty as possible. Sorry, you can't really see what I'm doing, but I'm just squeezing out the ink there. Okay, so an option that is not so pleasant to consider, but that you always have to consider anyway, is that if it's not the pen, it could be the user. Now, I'm not saying that Colin doesn't know what he's doing, but, my dear Colin, if you have fairly warm hands, for example, you could, I mean, the ink sac is a fairly soft material. If there's a fairly large sac in there, and it's possible that the heat from your hands is transferred into the sac, that would make the air in there expand, and the result of that would be ink blotting out. So I suppose if there is a particularly large sac in here, that could be a problem. The larger the sac, the more ink it holds, but you can never fill a sac completely. So there would also be a relatively large air bubble. So what we could try is to put a smaller sac in there, see whether that helps. But then I first would need to know if there's a big sac. So I think it's time we are going to disassemble some stuff here. How about that? Another option that I have not really discussed is that the nib tines are misaligned, and let me just check this out with my loop here. Yeah, there is some minor misalignment, but that is, one tine is a little bit higher than the other, but I think that is not causing this problem. And besides, I think that if you do just that, it's a flexi nib. Yeah, now alignment is fine, so that's not the problem. We have to open this up. So, vintage pen, always be careful, but almost all lever fillers have a section that is just friction fit. So I'm just going to see if I can very carefully pull the section and the barrel apart. There we go. Now look at that, that's the problem. Oh yeah, okay, so this is a huge sac. Look at that. Yeah, okay, well that was simple. This is not the original sac, I'm almost certain. And what someone did is put a very big sac in there, which is attractive because it holds a lot of ink. Even now, there's probably still some ink in there. I'm not sure whether I can squeeze it out like this. Yeah, the problem here is that this is a very tight fit. You see that? So there is almost no air barrier between the sac and the inside wall of the barrel. Why is that a problem? Well, as I've just said, if you have warm hands or you're on a warm climate, now Colin I think is in the north of England. Am I right there? Yeah, he's in the north of England, so that's probably not going to be particularly warm. Might be a bit humid though. So if you have warm hands, note I was going to say large hands there, it's my default, but I mean if you have fairly warm hands, this heat is just going to expand. The heat will transfer. There is no air barrier there, so it's going to go straight through the barrel into the sack. No air barrier. Air in there is going to expand. Boom! You get ink on your page. So what we're going to have to do is take off this sack, fit a smaller sack that leaves a better buffer. And while we're at it, we may well try to remove the nib and feed. On the one hand, don't fix it if it ain't broke. On the other hand, it's a vintage pen. It may do well with a good cleaning. You saw that railroading earlier. Maybe we can work a bit on that. So we have to de-sack this, put a new sack on. And that's all that's to it, huh? So I'm going to grab some sacks, and we're going to see if I got something that will fit there. Okay, so I got this, which is on the small side, but maybe we should err on the side of caution a bit, because apparently this pen has this problem. Now, as you can see, this is a much smoother fit, and you see that there is actually quite some space now between the sack and the inside of the walls of the barrel, unlike with the original sack, which leaves almost no such space. Okay, so the first thing we're going to have to do is take this sack off. That was easy. Was probably shellacked in place. In principle, this is a good sack, so I'll send that along back to Colin. Maybe he wants to use that again. And then we have the nib and feed. I think we should try to punch that out. So we have my very simple knockout block. That's probably going to be a tight fit. Yeah. Oh, that fits well. Okay. Maybe this will even fit. Yep. Okay. I use these metal rings so that I don't knock the section through the wood. Okay. We grab a punch. And a hammer. There we go. You notice my very odd rhythm. I find that gives me a nice pace for keeping control of what I am doing. We have the nib, we have the feed. Nothing is damaged, as you can see. These feeds can take a bit. The section, we're going to take some water. I always like using these empty jam jelly bottles for the very reason that you can close them up. So if you knock them over on your desk, it's not going to be a whole mess. Because they have a lid, you see. Put that in there. Where is the feed? Here's the feed. Okay. Nice. Put this in here. Add a bit of water. Cap it. Leave that be for a sec. Okay. And now we have to wait a bit and see whether we can clean the nib, feed, and section. Okay, I've just let this be for a couple of minutes, but no ink is coming off. I think Colin has been very smart and has been using just neutral inks, nothing too saturated or anything. Something I like to do with vintage pens too. It's easier to clean and you know you are not ruining something. Had some trouble getting the nib out, there we go. Close this up. Time to dry this off. Just using a tissue there, nothing fancy. I've seen pens that were in considerably worse shape, where you really had this gunk of ink. That all looks pretty good. Looks pretty nice. See if we can make that nib shine a bit more before I put it back in. Just a section, drying that off. Alright, well that's good. I'm just going to take a pick here. This is the end, this is the nipple, the section, the nipple of the section where the sack will fit onto. Now we have a type of thread there, so I don't really want to scrape in this direction. I want to scrape parallel to those grooves, not to damage anything. Not that those grooves are really necessary. I mean, they don't screw, the sack doesn't screw in place. I just want to get old bits of the sack and maybe some shellac or whatever was used to glue it in place out of there. And if that roughens it up a bit, then that should stick well. Alright. That doesn't look too bad. Right. I'm going to grab my jeweler's cloth. See if we can get a little bit of shine to that nib. Before I do that, just going to check out the tipping material there. Alright, that's good enough, that's good enough. If that's almost gone, then it's not a very sensible thing to use an abrasive cloth. Okay, before shot, yes. And now I'm just going to put this through this jeweler's cloth. You can pick them up from any jeweler that's worth his salt. This is from Yard Lead, got that with the Yard Lead pen. It has two layers, an inner layer which has a slight abrasive in there, and then there's an outer layer too. These things are wonderful. They are abrasive, so don't use them on every pen all the time. But once in a while I use them to polish up my pens just a little bit, and especially with a vintage pen, the gold nibs can get a little bit dull over the years, and this is a great way to bring back that good old luster after a shot. Nice and shiny, just the way I like it. Boom! Shakalaka! There we go. Resacking the pen. This is not going to be easy. This is going to be a fairly tight fit, I'm afraid. It's a pretty big nipple. I'm not sure whether I can fit this on. The fit is too tight. It's not going to work either, you see. I can already tell that this is going to be an interesting challenge. Although, when I see this, it may just work. Okay, so now we're going to have to check this for size. It's a pretty big barrel here. Very big. Okay, so I've shown you this before, and we're going to do it again anyway. First of all, I'm going to take me a sharp knife. Whee! And I use the same knockout block for cutting the sack. Just take this bit. Alright. Okay, so for fitting, what you want to do is you want to make sure there is a little bit of air space right there at the end of the barrel. So you stick the sack in, and then of course you have the section which will go in quite a bit, you see. So you definitely want to create a nice bit of slack there, because if I was going to put this in here, the feed wouldn't even fit, you see. So I align the section the way it's going to go in there, and I note that I want to get some space left, so I would say that this is a nice length. Alright, just making a slight indentation with my nail there so that I know where I got it cut. Cut along a straight line. So use a sharp knife. That really helps. So sharp I will put that away. Okay. Well, that looks like a decent fit to me. Yep. So I left some extra space there. If it really is a warm hand problem, then hopefully this will give some extra air buffer. Now we have to get that on there. I'm going to grab some shellac. A bit of talcum powder too. Okay. As I said, tight fit. But we may yet get that to work. It'll work. This sack was just a little bit smaller, then it would not work, and this is not the prettiest solution, but I think it's going to work anyway. I always used to put the shellac on there, cover about half of the nipple, then put the sack on. And I read recently in the book of Dear Marshall and Lawrence Oldfield that they always do it like this. So they put the sack on there, then put the shellac on, and it makes sense. So you kind of get a lubricant, but of course you can do this in any way you see fit. Either put the shellac on first, or put a bit of the sack on first, or whatever. Okay, I did a decent job. As you can see, the sack sticks out straightly. If it's at a slanted angle, obviously it's going to be a problem, because then it'll be pressing against one part of the barrel. Now, something else I noticed was that the lever is really good. It springs back very, very nice. But when it had this sack, it was fairly tough to operate, which is another telltale sign that the sack may be too large. Alright, now this is going to hold less ink. So Colin, I hope you'll forgive me. It's going to hold less ink than it did with this sack. Then again, it's a bit longer, but that's really not going to make a big difference, I'm afraid. It fits in there perfectly, as you can see. And what I hope is that the lever is still going to do enough, have enough reach, so to speak. I'm just looking on the inside there. I'm going to hook my nail behind this. Give me a sec. Okay. Oh, look, that reaches the other side of the barrel. That should be no problem. Okay. Well, it's very tempting to ink it up now and try it out again straight away. That's a very bad idea. You really want that shellac to dry. And although it will dry fairly quickly, I prefer to leave this for a night. So that's what we're going to do. And then, so I'll probably see you tomorrow again. Then we're going to put some talcum powder on there as a dry lubricant to absorb moisture. It makes it easier to slide this in there. Then also we're going to put the nib and feed back into the section, and Ooh, and then we're going to try out the pen again. How about that? See you later. Alright, so this was a bit of a time warp. It has been a night, and this looks like it's in pretty good shape. I can't pull that off, so that is nice and tight. Of course you don't want to pull this too hard, but you understand what I'm doing here. We have the section, the new sack, and the barrel. Now we have to put the nib and feed back in there, and that may be a little bit difficult. Now, I've had a good look at this, and it's very subtle, but there is one part that looks like it's a little bit broader in that opening than the other part. The broader part is where the nib will go. So let's see if we can just slide this in there. Okay, that was surprisingly easy, and I'm not entirely content yet, because you may see, let me see if I can zoom in a bit there. The setting is sort of okay. Maybe that feed can go in just a little bit further. No, it doesn't look like it. And I remember, because of course you want to make sure you know what you're looking at. I remember, so first of all, when I look at the nib like this, you don't really see the feed sticking out from the sides. That's okay. If I push this back further, then I'm afraid that the ink will gonna have a problem flowing all the way to the tip of the nib, because that's a fairly large distance. So this is interesting. Now I want to see, maybe move that just a little bit. Just fiddling around a bit there. Yeah, I'm not really liking the setting now, so I'm going to grab some grippy material, because what you may see here now is that the nib is aligned at a slightly off angle. You see the nib is a bit lower there than on that side, so I want to see if I can correct that. I'm just going to gently put this in here. I put the barrel on there not entirely tightly yet, but I don't want to accidentally pull the sack off, so now I just have a sort of a sack protector. I'll just grab that section, grab the nib and feed, and there we go. Alright, they're out. It's very hard to do that with your bare hands, you see. Okay, I think I like this setting better. I check that opening, something like this. Right. I've pushed the feed in a bit further. It used, before when I got it, it stuck out a bit farther. Now, I can still read, I'm not sure whether you can see that, but I can still read the word Blackbird. It's on the back of the feed. I can still read that, so I think that's good. You can always pull it out a bit further, but I think I like to try it in this setting. Okay, what I'm going to do now is take some talcum powder. We discussed that before. Just 100% pure talcum powder. I'm just going to give that pen a nice little coating of that. Well, not actually the pen, but the sack, I mean. A dry lubricant, a bit of a buffer against any moisture, should that get in there for whatever odd reason. That looks good to me, so I'm just wiping off my finger there. Close that up, don't want to knock that over. Alright, where's the barrel? Here is the barrel. And it's easy to move this around, Colin. If you don't like the lever on this side, you can always put it on the other side, but I always think this is a nice setup. Usually the lever is at a 90-degree angle with the nib. It can be tempting to shellac or glue a section in place, but of course you're only making stuff difficult for yourself or for future owners of that pen when you do so, so it's best not to. I think this looks okay. Let's ink that up and then see if the thing writes. Same ink I used before, Gandash Blue Sky. Just gonna take that towel away because otherwise there's not really a lot of grip going on. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to grab an ink cloth there just to clean the section, the barrel. There we go. Alright. Paper. Rhodia. Zoom out a bit. That was another review. But we can always reuse that bit of the paper. Right. Skin oil protector shield thing. You know, it looks good to me. And then it stopped. Now there we go. I was pushing it very hard there. Can still make it fling ink. Now, as you can see, it writes. I just want to have one more operation of that lever. Okay. Now I want to see, it's probably going to be a little bit hard to show you, but whether there's any ink in there. There's an easier way to show you. You see, what I want to see is what kind of ink capacity we're talking about, because I'm afraid it's gotten a bit smaller. There we go. So what I have here is that lid, one of those little jam jars. Okay, that's quite some ink. I suppose and I hope that inking it up a bit more often may be worth it and may be more interesting than having a pen that blobs ink on you. So, Colin, I hope this is to your liking. I'm going to clean that pen. I'll send it back to you. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.